I'm leaving, I said flatly. Fine, and don't bother coming back. My wife shot back. Normally, I'd fire off a go to hell on my way out. But this time I opted for something more dignified. Over 14 years of marriage, we'd thrown similar jabs back and forth. But this time I wasn't coming back. She'd realized soon enough that I meant it. Over the past 6 months, Jenna, my wife, had become a verbal wrecking ball. Her words hit harder than they ever had before, and I couldn't make sense of it. To avoid things boiling over, I started dodging her entirely. Each day, I spent more time in my car after work, stalling before heading inside. Sometimes, I'd come home after Jenna and Carrie, our 13-year-old daughter, had already eaten. If there were leftovers, I'd scrape together a plate. Lately, though, it seemed the food was gone before I even walked through the door. My name is Kurt Kaminsky, full name David Kurt Kaminsky. My dad's also David, so they called me Kurt from the start to avoid confusion. I'm not a junior, though. Dad's name is David John Kaminsky. Why he didn't give me the junior title, I'll never know. I'd have happily answered to junior or even DJ, but no, just Kurt. Or Nat. Yep. I'm Polish. Well, sort of. I'm an American with Polish roots. I've heard all the jokes, most of them anyway, and they seem to come up with new ones every year. In this town of 10,000, where Dad and I are the only Poles around, I tend to be the punchline. Technically, I'm only half Polish. My mom's side is German, French, Irish, and English. But because I'm a Kaminsky, I'm just the Pole. My soon-to-be ex-wife turned out to be someone I didn't recognize. I only discovered that 4 weeks ago. I'd been avoiding her as much as possible due to the constant tension, so it came out of nowhere. It was a Monday evening. I'd skipped dinner and hit up a diner, sitting in a corner booth. Just as I was about to order, I overheard a conversation in the booth behind me. I wasn't listening at first, but when I heard the word Pole, my ears perked up. So how long you been with the Polish guy's wife? One voice asked. The second voice, one I recognized instantly, replied. It was my best friend, George Carey. Since they tied the knot. Hell, I even had her on their wedding day, and he's clueless, George said casually, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I froze. They kept talking, but I couldn't process anything after that. My mind went blank until George added, yeah, we hook up at least twice a month. Kurt's so oblivious it's laughable. Right then, the waitress showed up to take my order. I muttered, sorry, gotta go, threw some cash on the table, and bolted, making sure they didn't see me. I drove aimlessly for an hour, trying to wrap my head around what I just heard. Jenna, my wife, with George, my best friend, the man who'd stood beside me at the altar, the guy I trusted to fix every car on my lot. He wasn't officially my mechanic, more like an exclusive contractor. I own a used car dealership, and George has always been the guy I rely on to inspect and repair my cars. Business is booming because people know they're getting reliable cars at fair prices, and if something goes wrong, I'm the one who makes it right. George is a big part of that. Pay him well, too. I even offered him a job once, but he laughed it off, joking, I'd lose all self-respect working for a Pole. He said it in jest, but I always felt there was something under the surface. Still, I kept him on as a contractor, not that he was all that independent. Truth was, I was his only source of income. That fact would be his downfall. As I drove, doubts crept in. Maybe I misheard? Maybe George was just running his mouth to impress someone? He had a habit of that. But I couldn't ignore it. I needed the truth. That night, when Jenna went to bed, I stayed up and checked her phone. It was locked, but I cracked the password easily. Our daughter's birth date. I found a few questionable messages, but nothing from George. His name being in her contacts wasn't unusual, he's my friend. After all. Maybe he was just bragging, I thought. Maybe it was all a lie. But Jenna's recent behavior said otherwise. Something wasn't right. I went to bed restless, finally dozing off after 2:30 a.m. The next day at work, George was his usual self, cracking Polish jokes like always. Normally, I let them slide, but not that day. George, what do you even know about Poland? I snapped. Bet you couldn't find it on a map if your life depended on it. You think Poles are dumb? but I'm sure they could find the US, maybe even our state. George stared at me, speechless. He wasn't the book-smart type, more street-smart and good with engines. That's probably why we got along in high school. I'd helped him graduate by tutoring him through his classes. Now I was rethinking everything about our friendship. Back in my office, I shut the door and thought about what to do. Confronting them outright wouldn't work. They'd deny it or find a way to twist things. I needed proof. I called a private investigator in Santa Fe and explained the situation. If the meetups are as infrequent as you say, it could get pricey, the PI said. You might want to track her phone instead. Less hassle, less money, and you'll know where she is in real time. He gave me the name of a tracking app and didn't charge me a dime. It's all public info anyway. Happy to help. You'll be getting a check, I promised. If you're ever in Silver City, drop by Kaminsky's lot. That night, I waited until everyone was asleep, then installed the app on Jenna's phone and synced it with mine. It ran in the background, invisible to her. For the first time in days, I slept soundly. The next day, I monitored her movements. Jenna worked part-time at the university bookstore, 15 to 20 hours a week. She called the money her mad money and used it for salon trips or groceries. That day, everything seemed normal. George was at home most of the day, busy with cars, and Jenna stuck to her usual routine. That evening, I tried to play nice. I suggested we all go out for dinner. Jenna hesitated but agreed. Carrie, being a typical teenager, groaned about it, but I insisted. Dinner went fine until I brought up George in casual conversation. Jenna shifted uncomfortably and quickly changed the subject. My suspicions grew. That night, I couldn't shake the doubt. I checked her phone again while she slept. Nothing. By Saturday, I was almost ready to convince myself George had been lying. Maybe I'd misjudged. But my gut refused to let it go. At 2 a.m., I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Unable to sleep, I went downstairs for a drink. Sitting at the table with a glass of Jack and Coke in one hand and Jenna's phone in the other, I entered the password again. Suddenly, a thought struck me like lightning. Our daughter's birth date was the key. Jenna's pregnancy had been complicated. Carrie was born exactly 9 months after our wedding. Doctors said stress might have caused Jenna's birth control pills to fail. But what if George's claims were true? What if Carrie wasn't mine? The thought took hold. I went to the bathroom, grabbed a cotton swab, and gently swabbed the inside of Carrie's cheek as she slept. She didn't stir. I sealed it in a plastic bag and repeated the process for myself. By Monday morning, I was at the university handing the samples to a scientist for testing. As I left, I couldn't help but smile. A nervous, worried smile. The truth was coming, and I wasn't sure I was ready for it. Infidelity was confirmed. After lunch, Paul presented a spreadsheet, and we reviewed the next steps for both my plans. The following 2 days crawled by, each hour weighed down with anticipation for the DNA results. Late Wednesday evening, the department head called me. He confirmed the results and set up a visit to discuss a car he was considering. When he arrived, I led him into my office, but his face told me everything before he even spoke. The samples aren't related, he said. I nodded, though the truth hit me like a punch to the gut. Even though I'd half expected it, hearing the confirmation stung deeper than I anticipated. He handed me the envelope with the official results, giving me a moment to process. I glanced back at him, pushing the pain aside. So, about that car you were interested in? I asked, trying to redirect the moment. He smiled, grateful for the shift in conversation. Well, it's a bit of a midlife cliché, but I just hit the big 5-0. I'm thinking about getting a sports car, maybe a Mazda Miata. I don't have one on the lot right now, but I'll hit the auction tomorrow and find a good one for you, I promised. I'll give you a call tomorrow afternoon with updates. As he left, I thought to myself, Jenna won't even notice I'm gone. I told Anna, my assistant, I might leave early for the auction, but I knew Jenna wouldn't call. She never needed me for much these days. Driving around the city afterward, everything felt different. The buildings, the streets, even the familiar landmarks, all seemed tainted with this new reality. I dialed my lawyer. He sounded genuinely sorry when I explained what had happened, but he directed me to a trusted colleague specializing in family law. I set up an evening appointment for the next day. Later that evening, sitting alone at a restaurant with a plate of food I didn't taste, I reflected. Have I really wasted the last 15 years of my life? It wasn't just my marriage. Now I couldn't even claim a child. I'd raised her as mine, but biologically, she wasn't. That fact sat heavy on my chest. I knew I couldn't pretend anymore. The truth was out, and there was no going back. But one thing was clear: George would face consequences. It didn't matter that he'd been my best friend for years. With friends like him, who needs enemies? And Jenna, she wouldn't escape this unscathed either. I wondered, did she know Carrie wasn't mine? Or had she been blindsided too? Even if she didn't know, she still kept the secret of her infidelity. On our wedding day, with my best man, anger surged through me. I had to get out. I couldn't go home. I didn't trust myself not to say or do something I'd regret. So I called Jenna. Hey, I'll be staying overnight in Albuquerque to prepare for tomorrow's auction. I told her, keeping my voice neutral. Oh, okay. Have a safe trip, she replied. She didn't seem surprised. I wondered if she'd see my absence as an opportunity. Would she use it to meet George? The thought churned in my stomach. Either way, I'd keep an eye on her tracker. The drive to Albuquerque gave me too much time to think. I planned to buy 20 cars, including a Miata for my client. Arranging their delivery would be easy enough, but the question was, who would inspect them? George usually handled it, but there was no way I was giving him another cent. He didn't know it yet, but his time in my life and my business was over. When I arrived around 9 a.m., I checked into a Best Western. Nothing fancy, but I didn't need much. The room was clean, the bed comfortable, good enough. I'm a simple man with simple needs. Once settled, I checked the phone tracker. Jenna's phone hadn't moved. She was still at home. At least her phone was. Sleep was impossible that night, though. I stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment of betrayal in my mind. How did she justify it? How did she continue it for all these years? Was there ever a time when she loved me? Or was it all a lie? Our marriage had never been perfect, but I thought we had love, loyalty at least. I now realized how naive I'd been. The struggles we'd faced after Carrie's birth felt futile in hindsight. Carrie had been a difficult baby, colicky, restless, and always crying. Jenna had sworn off having more kids after that. But now I saw the truth. Carrie's arrival wasn't a miracle of love. It was a mistake born of betrayal. George, my best friend, my wife, the two people I trusted most had conspired to ruin me, and they thought I'd never find out. I needed to calm down, so I turned on the TV, hoping for some distraction. A dumb comedy played, and for a moment, I let the mindless laughter pull me out of my spiral. By 11 o'clock, I finally drifted off, knowing tomorrow would be a long day. The auction went smoothly. I bought several good cars at great prices, and I even networked with other dealers. I didn't find a Miata at the auction, but two dealers had one each, one red, one black. I promised to check with my client about his color preference. It was a small thing, but for a moment, focusing on my business gave me a sense of control. That afternoon, I met with the lawyer. The news wasn't good. If I pursued a divorce, I'd lose half of everything, including my business, and be saddled with alimony and child support for a child who wasn't even mine. In that moment, I made a decision. Divorce wasn't the answer. Instead, I'd leave Jenna with George's child. I'd pay off the mortgage, keeping the house in my name so she couldn't sell it. I'd cover taxes and utilities, but I wouldn't live there. Arriving home late that night, exhausted, I told Jenna I was beat. I'm heading to bed after a shower, I muttered. Want dinner? She asked, as if she cared. No, I ate already. The shower felt like a brief escape, the warm water washing away some of the tension. I crawled into bed, asleep in minutes, for the first time in weeks. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now I had a plan. Early the next morning, I hit the office before anyone else was up. I briefed Paul on the auction and told Anna to stop assigning work to George. Is everything okay? She asked, Her brow furrowed. Just following up on some changes, that's all, I said. You're doing great, Anna. I'll need your help more than ever. She nodded. You can count on me. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had some control over my life. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over yet. Wednesday, my lawyer called. Hey Kurt, I think I've got a solution to your potential issue. Can you swing by this afternoon to discuss it? Absolutely. I'm eager to get started, I replied. The tension at home had become unbearable. That afternoon, I met with my lawyer and listened to the plan. I liked what I heard. It would take about 2 weeks to execute, but if it worked, it would be worth it. Over the next 2 weeks, I gradually moved my personal items and tools into a nearby apartment. I did it discreetly. During the weekends, I cleared out my closet and drawers while Jenna and Carrie were out of the house. Jenna did laundry during the week, so she didn't notice how empty my space had become. That brings me back to Monday night when I finally told Jenna, I'm leaving. Once again, she turned her rude, condescending tone on me, mocking me for being Polish and for being a used car salesman. In the past, I'd let anger take me to a motel for a night or two, depending on how heated the argument got. But this time was different. Tuesday morning, I got to the lot early. I gathered my employees in the conference room for our regular weekly meeting. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary to them. I stood up and began. Good morning, everyone. As you know, the cars I purchased a couple of weeks ago arrived yesterday. They've all been inspected and prepped for sale. Moving forward, we won't be using George for any more work. If he asks, just let him know we're going in a different direction. I paused, my throat tightening. You've all been fantastic. You're like family to me, which is why this next part is hard to say. I wiped a tear before continuing. I've sold the business. Surprised expressions filled the room. Nothing will change regarding your roles, I assured them, except for Anna. She'll be taking on some of my duties and getting a well-deserved raise. They exchanged glances before applause broke out. They respected Anna and recognized how hard she worked. Anna, come talk to me after the meeting, I added. I'll still be around, I explained as they settled down. I'll be in an advisory role and may sell from time to time, but I don't want to interfere with your work. The meeting ended, and as I stepped outside, George was standing there. Hey, why wasn't I included in the meeting? He asked, looking surprised. It was for staff only. You're not an employee, I replied evenly. He blinked, taken aback. I see the cars arrived. I'll get started on them now. No need. They're already prepped for sale, I said firmly. But I always inspect the cars, he protested. George, I've sold the business. The new owner wants to go in a different direction. I informed him, holding back the anger simmering under the surface. You sold it? He repeated, stunned. What now? You can pick up your check for the past 2 weeks. Anna didn't assign you much work lately, so it won't be much, I said bluntly. He'd expected a windfall from the new cars, but he was out of luck. I felt no sympathy. I wished I could tell him exactly what I thought of him, but I held back. Sometimes less is more. Later, Anna came to my office, and I asked her to keep what I shared confidential. Of course, Kurt. I'd never betray your trust, she assured me. Here's the deal, I began. I've set up companies registered in Nevada. One bought the parking lot. The other bought the dealership. I own all the shares. Eventually, I'll divorce Jenna, but she's not getting the business. I've moved out. She doesn't know yet, and I'm not going back. Anna's face grew serious as I explained. She had an affair with George. Carrie isn't my biological daughter. I suspect she's his. I don't even know if Jenna realizes that. They'll both find out soon enough. Anna's jaw tightened, anger flashing in her eyes. That's unbelievable. I'm not divorcing her just yet, I continued. I'll keep paying taxes and utilities so she can't claim abandonment. If she tries to file for divorce, the business won't be there to take. By the time she figures it out, the proceeds will be long gone. What about the business now? She asked. You'll handle daily operations. I'll be around for advice, but I trust you to manage things. Anna nodded, though her expression was grim. I can't believe what you've been through, Kurt. Before I go, I have one more task for you, I said. Order a new sign and letterhead. We're changing the name of the business to Helpless Car. She looked puzzled. Helpless Car. It'll make sense someday, I replied. For now, trust me. It tells the whole story. Anna didn't press further, just nodded and promised to take care of it. After leaving the lot, I got in my Audi and started driving toward Albuquerque. 2 hours later, my phone rang. It was Jenna. I hadn't expected her to call so soon, but I answered out of curiosity. Hello, I said through the car's speaker. Kurt, what's going on? She asked, her voice cautious. Nothing much. Heading to Albuquerque, I replied flatly. Why are you going there? She pressed. To pick up a car, I said, keeping my tone even. So what I heard must not be true, she muttered. George called and said you sold the business. Why is he calling you? I asked, frowning at her slip. He's your best friend, Kurt. He was just curious if I knew anything, she said defensively. Best friend. I scoffed. What a joke. Why would you sell the business without telling me? She asked, her tone shifting to panic. It's my business. I owned it before we got married. I can do whatever I want. I shot back. Besides, this way you won't have to be embarrassed anymore. What about the mortgage? She asked, her voice growing frantic. I paid it off. You only need to worry about utilities and taxes now, I replied calmly. Kurt, you can't do this, she pleaded, desperation in her voice. I already have, I said flatly. I'm not coming back. What about your daughter? She cried, trying to appeal to my emotions. You mean Carrie? The girl ashamed of my last name and my job? Well, it doesn't matter anymore. Kurt, she's just a kid. Don't take this out on her. I'm just not coming back. With that, I hung up and turned off my phone. Let her stew on that. As I drove toward Albuquerque, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. I knew Jenna would call George next to compare notes, but I didn't care. I was done. The open road stretched ahead of me, and for the first time in years, I felt free. The house was still mine since I'd purchased it before marrying Jenna, and my name was the only one on the deed. Disappointment washed over me as I pulled into the driveway. The yard was unkempt, the landscaping neglected. The porch light was on, which meant Jenna was probably home. I knocked on the door. After a moment, Carrie answered. Her eyes widened. Dad. Hi, Carrie. Is your mom home? She stuttered before yelling, Mom! From the kitchen. I heard Jenna's tense, high-pitched voice. What's the matter? Carrie stared at me, her voice louder now. Dad! Jenna appeared from around the corner, froze, then shrieked, Where are you going? I stayed calm. Traveling, I said evenly. At that exact moment, George appeared from the bedroom, in his underwear. Oh, I said dryly. The whole family's here. Mom, Dad, and child. What the hell are you talking about? Jenna snapped. I shrugged. Looks like George has stepped in to fill my role. It's only fair, right? After all, it's his. Jenna looked confused, while Carrie turned visibly upset. I decided to clarify. Actually, young lady, you seem misinformed, I said, correcting her tone. Something I knew she hated. George never worked for me. That was his choice. So no, I couldn't have fired him. Jenna cut in. What about groceries? Gas for the car? The bills? Do you think you can just waltz back in here? No, I replied coldly. I'll wait until you and your partner find another place to live. This house is still mine. Jenna crossed her arms. I'm not leaving my home. Correction, I said, my voice hard. This is my home. I bought it before we got married, and my name's the only one on the deed. I've been covering the taxes and utilities while I was gone. That makes me the legal owner, even if I've been away. You left, so now it's mine. Jenna shot back stubbornly. That's not how the law works. I'll give you until the end of next month to find somewhere else to live, I stated firmly. Just make sure you take your daughter with you. Jenna's voice rose. What do you mean your daughter? She's our daughter. Couldn't help but chuckle. You couldn't have said it better yourself. Jenna's face contorted with confusion. I turned to Carrie. Carrie, I know you hate being called Polish. So here's some news. I'm not your real father. George is. The room fell silent. Jenna's voice dropped to a whisper. What? Yes, Jenna, I said, my voice steady. Your carelessness on our wedding day resulted in a child. Not mine. But look on the bright side, Carrie. Now you can take your real father's last name. Maybe your mom chose Carrie out of respect for him. Jenna and George exchanged a panicked look, both pale as ghosts. What about you, George? I taunted. Don't you want to step up as a father? Look at the bright side. It's only 4 more years until college. I don't believe this, they stammered almost in unison. I handed them the DNA report. See for yourselves. Jenna and George grabbed the envelope, glanced at the results, then sat there, stunned. Turning to Carrie, I said, tell the lovebirds that your mom will be served with divorce papers and an eviction notice next week. I turned and walked out. As I left, the thought lingered. Had this affair been ongoing throughout my marriage? Did Jenna ever choose me? Or was I just a convenient placeholder? I felt utterly humiliated. George had cracked jokes to my face, mocked me behind my back, all while destroying my family. Back at the apartment, I numbed the anger with a beer. The next morning, I met my lawyer to start the paperwork. I knew I'd have to sell the house and split the proceeds, but I took solace in one fact. Being unemployed on paper meant I wouldn't owe alimony or child support, especially with George in the picture. The betrayal still stung deeply, though. Rebuilding trust with anyone, man or woman, felt like an impossible task. Maybe therapy was in order. I wasn't ready to face that yet. The divorce proceedings began. I made it clear at work that I was no longer the boss. 1 sale a week was all I needed to keep my expenses covered. When the court brought up child support, I ensured my accounts were empty. I left just enough for basic survival. At month's end, Jenna hired a lawyer. How she afforded one, I didn't know, maybe pro bono. It didn't matter. My accounts were clean. My colleagues told me that George spent the first 2 weeks showing up at the dealership almost daily, trying to get work. Anna turned him down every time. Eventually, he gave up. Without his certifications, he ended up at Valvoline, changing oil for $13 an hour. Good luck paying bills on that. I listed the house for sale and sent Jenna the notice. She had to vacate before the sale closed. A week later, she knocked on my apartment door. I let her in reluctantly. What do you want? I asked. Kurt, can we talk? She said softly. I'm not sure that's a good idea. We're in a legal battle. Come on, Kurt. Just us. No lawyers. Can we have a civil conversation? She pleaded. Fine, I said. Let's go to Denny's. I figured witnesses were a good idea. Over coffee, I finally asked, why, Jenna? She hesitated. The simple answer? I liked both of you. I couldn't choose. So you were seeing both of us at the same time? I pressed. She nodded. Yes, but George warned me not to tell you. He said it would ruin your friendship. Then why did you say yes when I proposed? Tears welled in her eyes. Because I loved you, and I loved him, but I knew George wouldn't make a good husband. So when you proposed, I focused on us and the wedding. So on our wedding day, you were with him? I asked. She broke down crying. Yes. I shook my head. Well, now you have him. And your child. Kurt, I still love you, she said desperately. It's nice to hear, Jenna, but I don't think you know what love is, I said flatly. I loved you more than anything. Clearly, you can't say the same. Before leaving, I asked one last question. Have you ever stopped? She hesitated before answering honestly. No, we never stopped. We met twice a month. Her words were the final nail in the coffin. Well, now you're free to do whatever you want. Your choices don't affect me anymore. For months later, our divorce was finalized in court. George showed up, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Outside the courthouse, Jenna suggested, maybe we could grab a drink, traditionally. Sure, I said, sarcastic but civil. As I walked away, I thought, this is the end. They deserve each other. Jenna would have to adjust to a lower standard of living now. I allowed myself a small, bitter smile. Resentment still lingered, but I knew one thing for sure. No matter what anyone thought of me or my heritage, I demanded respect.